gentlemen, we would like to extend a very warm welcome to each one of you at the nice global conclave from the laps of the beautiful Himalayas, where the Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement is located. The think tank was established in the month of February in the year 2016. It undertakes independent research in the field of international relations, foreign policy, security, development. NICE has 4 research centers: China Studies, Neighborhood Studies, Non-Traditional Security Studies, and Security and Strategic Studies. The Institute focuses on 8 research topics: climate change and energy, global governance, sustainable development and smart cities, refugee and migration, China's Belt and Road Initiative, border and transboundary water politics, Indo-Pacific affairs, disaster management, and international economy and development. Previously, NICE has had the opportunity for speakers from all around the globe.
It's a great pleasure inviting me to speak here at NICE.
It's a real pleasure to be able to speak with all of you.
Well, thank you anyway, and I certainly admire the work that you're doing.
I'm very happy to be with you all.
NICE Global Conclave is the flagship event of Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement. The theme of the 3-day conference is Connecting Nepal to the World, with the aim to bring the leaders, diplomats, business leaders, and scholars from all around the globe. The objective of the conclave is to introduce Nepal to the world and at the same time update the Nepalese policy makers and experts about the fast-changing geopolitics, which will help Nepal reshape its foreign policy to achieve its national goal. Session 14 of the conference, titled Post-COVID-19 World Order. And to chair and moderate this session, it's a real pleasure to have Professor Dr. Rajesh Rajagopalan. Dr. Rajesh Rajagopalan is professor at Jawaharlal-Nehru University. Previously, he was senior fellow at Observer Research Foundation and research fellow at Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis. He has taught at Hunter College, Brooklyn College, and Queens College of the City University of New York. He has several publications on his name. Without any further ado, I request the chair to take over.
Thank you, Dr. Jaswal, and thank you, NICE, for Nepal for inviting me to chair this session. We have a fascinating panel which looks at the post-COVID-19 world order. Obviously, a topic that is, that is both difficult to think about because we still are in the middle of the pandemic. And it will take us some time to figure out what all the consequences are. But nevertheless, obviously, we'll have to try to think through the consequences of the current pandemic and what this will mean to the international order. I mean, the pandemic is only one factor. It's sort of it's one more factor that is affecting the global order, because already the global order was being affected by the changing balance of power. Both the United States' relative decline, China's rise, the increasing global economic interactions, the shift in the focus of global power towards Asia Pacific. So what we have been seeing over the last 20, 30 years has been a sort of a flux in the international order. And that itself was difficult to figure out where it was going. I mean, if you look at the previous 45 years, we had a fairly stable balance of power, which is bipolar, stayed bipolar for almost 45 years. And what we have had since then, since the end of the Cold War, is a somewhat more uncertain world order. And what we have today with the pandemic is one more factor that plays into that uncertainty. So it is, even though we are not entirely out of it, nevertheless, it is a good time to sort of think about what might be how this might play out in terms of the flux that is already there, and what this might mean for not just South Asia, not just for Nepal and its neighborhood, but also for the entire international system. I mean, what happens to multilateralism? What happens to conflict? Are we likely to see greater conflict? Are we facing a Thucydides trap, and so on and so forth? I mean, there's plenty of questions to sort of address, and we have a fascinating panel also to sort of address that. We have my old senior colleague, Professor Chenoy, who was my dean at the School of International Studies until a couple of years ago. She has been the chairperson of the Area Studies program and director of the Center for Russian and Central Asian Studies. Her main area of interest has been Central Asia and Russian studies, but she's also worked a lot on women's issues, on the United Nations, UNESCO, and obviously a large number of publications on all of these issues, including on internal conflict within India, on Russia, and comparative politics and so on and so forth. So we could not have anybody better to start off this discussion. Following her, so she will look she's broadly going to address whether the strategy community has learned any lessons from the COVID experience. I mean, I think she's basically putting all of us under the microscope, as it were. So that's quite a fascinating way to look at the issue. Following her, we'll have the noted Chinese scholar from Fudan University's Institute of International Studies, Professor Shen Dingli, who has been not only a professor at Fudan, but also a visiting professor at Washington University in St. Louis. It's published extensively on China, US security relations, on regional security, arms control, and he is a fairly well-known figure, especially in India, on people who work on security issues and especially nuclear security issues. He has also been the vice president of. He's also the vice president of the Chinese Association of South Asian Studies and Shanghai Association of American Studies. So in a sense, he sort of bridges both the South Asia part and the US-China part also. We don't have, and he'll be looking at the impact of COVID not only on the US and China, but also on the world order. We unfortunately don't have Dr. Pant, but following that, we will have Dr. Mehmet Ozkan, who's the executive director of Maarif Foundation. He has taught at Turkish National Police Academy as a professor of international relations in Bogota, Colombia, as well as in Sarajevo in Bosnia and Herzegovina. He also served as a senior fellow with the Center for Global Policy and a researcher at CETA Foundation in Turkey. And he has spent time both in Egypt as well as in India at the Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis in India, in Delhi, where many of us have spent time also. So he has a PhD from Sevilla University in Spain in international relations, and is author of several books on foreign policy and international politics on Turkey, Egypt, and so on. Then we'll have Dr. Zeno Leoni, who is a teaching fellow in the challenges to the international order program at the Defense Studies Department in King's College, and which is based within the Joint Service and Staff College of the Defense Academy of the United Kingdoms. He's also a visiting scholar in Defense and Security Studies at Nebria University, and associate also with the Lao China Institute at King's College, London. He has published a recent monograph on American grand strategy from Obama to Trump, imperialism after Bush and China's hegemonic challenge, as well as worked extensively on US-China issues in the MENA region. He'll be looking at broadly at the blowback of American grand strategy and a new type of Cold War between US and China. So we have 4 panelists who are all looking at different aspects of the same issue. So we will be able to sort of, at the end of that, we will be able to sort of have a good discussion about looking at the post-COVID world from different perspectives. So without further ado, let me, even though we have one less participant, I would still ask each of the panelists to limit their remarks to about 10 minutes, 10 to 11 minutes maximum, so that all of these are fascinating topics, and we should be able to have a very good discussion after the presentation. So I would still ask all the panelists to limit their remarks to about 10 minutes maximum. We'll start with Professor Anuradha Chenoy. Professor Chenoy.
Thank you, Rajesh, and I'm delighted to be here with this very distinguished panel. And I'm grateful to the Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and our former student, Pramod, who is the force and energy behind this institute. I was here last night till quite late. We had another panel. And I must say the attendance was remarkable. There were 100 students or researchers till 10 o'clock last night. So today the topic that we were given is the post-COVID world order. And my argument is the following, that the continuity of the world order before, during, and after the pandemic is the imbrication of neoliberal capitalism and the aspiration of nation states for hegemony and influence. This frame is structural and did not shift during the pandemic and will remain post-pandemic whenever that happens. It contributes to the interlinked traps of climate change and ecological devastation, social inequity, deepening militarization, and the increasing centralization of power, economic and political power that we are witnessing in this phase. And this deepening of power has actually increased during the COVID pandemic. And also it's evident that all this multiple traps, as we can call it, led to the failure of most states to protect their citizens, was starkly evident during the pandemic, where numbers died as many as people have been killed in wars, especially in the United States or even India. More people have died in the pandemic than they have during war. So the strategic community and policy thinkers must look at this phenomena equally. So my first argument is that, of course, the dominant feature of the world order is the US-Sino competition, and this has been deepened by the pandemic, even while the US presidential elections brought in a more reasoned president into power. Evident is the proposed Strategic Competition Act of 2021, which was being debated in the Senate and the House, that argues that the US dominance is, in quotes, preponderance of power, unquote, that will be projected militarily, financially, and technologically against 3 major enemies, which is China, Russia, and Iran. Now, while it is argued that the US is turning or moving inwards and is now, critiquing globalization because what it has done to its own economy and how it has pushed China and other emerging countries forward, they're blaming themselves. But nonetheless, at the same time, they maintain their huge number of military bases abroad. And the US is set to further its alliances with the Gulf kingdoms and Israel on one side and Quad on the other, and various other countries. And they would continue with the militarization of space, land, and sea, maintain nuclear strength, and also try to recover some of its financial muscle by checking the BRI, oppose opposing the RCEP, they moved out of it, and economically by maintaining the international role of the dollar, which again, China and various other countries are slowly and gradually, and I've written an article on this, have been moving away from dollar and the dollar swap, and they're trading greatly in local currencies. But it's no threat to the dollar at all as yet. The second issue is China's projects its peaceful rise through finance and technology, and its strategy will be to gather alliances with a large number of small states in Eurasia. I believe that this concept of peaceful rise was very useful, but under Xi Jinping, it has been numbed a bit because of his aggressive postures in the South China Seas. So they cannot continuously talk of peaceful rise and yet send their gunboats into this region and threaten countries around their borders. However, I think it's time to note that Xi Jinping's global strategy envisages three stages. One is achieving world-class forces, B, managing and deterring war, and C, maintaining a strategic balance. And I think I have agreed with the analysis which has been done by Walden Bellow and others, where they argue that even while China is talking of this strategic balance is actually intrinsically unstable. And the US has a much higher balance of forces and offensive capabilities, and China cannot be a match to that, and they can make errors, especially in the Indo-Pacific, which is a possible theater of wars or accidental wars, etc., if we are doing projections. 3, Russia. Now, Russia continues to hold on and increase its military power and strategic alliances with China. In the last session, which I overheard, someone in that session made the argument that it's a good thing that Biden made a move towards Russia, and I agree with that. But China and Russia's relation can in no way be destabilized, and Russia would doesn't see the West as an enemy. They never have. They've always been in a defensive, and from that defensive, they move to the offensive. They're interested in maintaining their zone of influence in the former Soviet space, their interests in West Asia, etc. But they would be interested in some kind of entente or détente, especially with Europe, but also with the US. But they would not allow it to disturb their relations with China. These are extremely old. They have a continuity since the days of Mikhail Borodin, even since the days of Peter the Great, I would argue, where they always saw China as an area of partnership where they would be liberators, where the West would be imperialists. They do have contradictions with China. They have genuine fears about China moving into Central Asia, but they would resolve all this bilaterally. Economically and strategically, they're extremely tied now with China, and that is where their interest lies. And this has been proven over decades now. And they're not going to do a China on Russia like China did when they collaborated with, and they ditched the Soviet Union in the 1970s. So those principal and minor contradictions and social imperialism, all that is not going to happen. The Russians and Chinese, like the Indians, see a multipolar world, and they believe that a relationship with one country does not have to be on the basis or destruction with another. So this is my view on Russia. As far as the middle powers or the emerging countries like India, Brazil, South Africa, Turkey, Indonesia, and others are concerned, they have a deep and enduring interest actually in a multipolar world. Yesterday, Barry Buzan used another word for it because I don't think they like to accept words which have come from Russia, China, India, etc. He said, there's a declining liberal or the liberal countries. There's a decline of the liberal world order, but there is a plural world, and he said there's no denying it that there's going to be plurality. And even in the last session, what little I heard of it, they did agree that there is going to be a more or less, that kind of bipolarity or unipolarity is not going to continue. So in those kind of conditions, all these countries, whether it's India, Brazil, South Africa, Turkey, Indonesia, they would, according to issue, they would sometimes tilt towards the US and sometimes negotiate with China. And that's what India has been doing, despite this description that India is now moving away from Russia and they're tilting towards the US. Of course they are, but the relations with the US is new. But at no point have I seen India compromising its relations with Russia. Every time there is any need, they go again to Russia, and they have sought exemptions for their trade and nuclear and other arms from the US during its unilateral sanctions on Russia, and the US has had to grant it. So the US, of course, will seek strategic alliances with them. And the two key areas of global assertion and geopolitics, however, will remain in the MENA, that is the Middle East and North African areas with its oil resources, and the Indo-Pacific with its resources and major sea lanes. The US, Russia, and China have different approaches to these regions. The US is looking for stronger alliances where, on the one side, they would like to bring Israel, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Gulf kingdoms, and on the other side, the Quad. And the US imperial project, however, will not succeed. I think in the last session, Amit Gupta put it very well, that the US military cannot be defeated. It can continue with wars, but it does not want to stay in countries. And that is why no US intervention has succeeded to date, because they cannot stay on in countries and fix those countries. Resistances start, and everyone knows what happens, the latest being Afghanistan again. So therefore, in conclusion, I would argue that the US will remain a superpower. I don't think it should have so much anxiety about China catching up. It's still very far. China is nowhere in soft power, in the dollar, and even in defense, it's almost 13 points behind the US. But at the same time, what we are going to see is this plural or multipolar world, however you call it. The US strategy is not in favor of this multipolarity, and they want to continue to seek hegemony and bolster alliances in order to again get a unipolar moment. China, on the other hand, sees this multipolarity as very useful because it gives them space, and at the same time, there are many countries challenging hegemony, and they have not achieved that hegemony yet. Now, we don't know what will happen if and when they achieve hegemony, whether they will still plug for the multipolar world, but currently they are. And the Russians definitely want to see a multipolar world, and they would not like to see China as a hegemon, just as they do not want to see the US as a hegemon. However, this balance of power, contrary to what the realist thinkers have been arguing, is not a very stable situation, and especially currently. Meanwhile, and this is my last statement as it were, the major issues confronting people and states are issues like climate change, increasing inequity, the abuse of human rights, which continue unabated, increasing authoritarianism, and appeals made by the UN Secretary General, supported by civil society and others, and recently reiterated by 127 Nobel laureates, state that life on this planet rests in the collective hands of humanity, and that the political leadership should look at this. So clearly, as Rajesh said in the beginning, I am arguing that the strategic community is quite a powerful community, and they see themselves as advisors to states. So they should put this message also squarely as part of their analysis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Chenoy. Very clear, very concise, and thank you for keeping to the time. I think that there's a lot there. I mean, it made 5 different points, and all of them are worth discussing. I'm sure we'll have a lot of discussion on that after the presentations are over. Professor Shen Dingli.
Thank you for inviting me. For the post-COVID world order, first, we have not reached that post-COVID stage yet. The US still has not ended its war on the COVID. And India is still working hard on its own challenge. And with the new variant of the COVID, the world is being threatened. So Chinese story said that now when for the infection by the new variant, it only takes 14 seconds to transmit the disease. People don't need to contact each other. If a person who has been infected to enter a building, he can leave a deadly poison for 4 days. Second, people entering the building within the 4 days, an entire building is infected. And given this, in my view, it's far from the stage of the post-COVID. We may still need to spend another 18 months to claim a win over COVID. This is my first point. We have a long distance toward the end of this battle. Second, we can imagine what would happen for the post-COVID public health world order. One, the US is proposing to build a capacity for the Earth planet to build quickly within 30 days, 30, to develop a vaccine to deal with a disease like COVID. Now it takes 300 days. So in the post-COVID time, we should have a time reduction by 90%, only 1 month. China can do, India can do, and the US, UK, we all can do. This is a dream world order. It cannot be attained quickly, but I do think it would be in the interest of the mankind to develop such a post-COVID public health world order. And then the post-COVID world order would be more healthy, robust, and resilient. That's great. Second, the US has proposed to negotiate for a world convention to share publicly the data of the patients who would be infected by a future COVID, a future pandemic. If China would not submit its record of those patients to WHO, which is happening now. US say, let's negotiate. I think no country would have a reason not to share its such data. So probably China would join a future negotiation toward a post-COVID public health regime. And that would be great. The cost, the lesson would not be wasted from this time experience. So mankind would grow more competently. For this, India, China, US, etc. share a common objective. So largely, I expect the world would become more competent in the public health area. If we would meet those above mentioned two objectives of American government, the Biden administration. But then what else? The post-COVID world political order, economic order, and world security order. I think we may have two deeply divided and mutually alternative order. One is China-US work together in the future to beat successfully another pandemic like Ebola. And this time, China-US have lots of difference, but they could overcome their difference by respectively generate future vaccine each by 1 month and offer this to the other country who needed it. And they would share the medical record and help the entire world. And they would reduce, if not remove, mutual suspicion. And China would become more humble and to smile, as Xi Jinping recently suggested, for China's grandeur public diplomacy and propaganda. China should build a great image that is trustful, adorable, and respectful. 可信, 可亲, 可敬. China should have humility, humbleness, and change. Great. This is all Premier Zhou Enlai have worked very hard to make China to be looking like. And Jiang Zemin has worked along this line, Hu Jintao especially. But later on, war warrior, Chinese diplomats, they shouted, they beat America, they beat UK. They are very eloquent in using the language that classic diplomats tend not to use. And they are promoted if you use it. But now Xi Jinping said, let's be humble. Let's make our diplomacy effective. If China would, Xi Jinping would truly mean what he said, it's not impossible. China can improve its image for diplomacy and for public diplomacy. Look, China has not continuously to show its documentary, China Awesome. So, 厉害了我的国. This documentary is no longer available on China's big screen. China does not want to tell others, we are awesome, you should be scared. We used to think we are great, we should have our confidence. But the more Chinese tend to have build our confidence, the more other countries may tend to have less confidence. So Xi Jinping is more careful not to undercut others' confidence. So he must have ordered not to continue to show this movie. And we have a state policy for funding our strategic innovation. China has a plan which is called Make in China 2025 to spend 10 years from 2015 to 2025, spending 300 billions of US dollars on Chinese key SOE to make them excellent. And we are no longer saying we are doing it. But what I understand, we are still doing it, but we are not saying we don't want to make a China to feel overconfident, to make other countries to feel less confident. And in the early stage of last year, Chinese government announced we are going to produce a book to say how our government is capable. The book's name is Great Country Beating COVID. That book was never printed because of domestic controversies. So this is China, which is very controversial, increasingly less respected by people in America. Only 9% of America, according to Gallup poll, likes China, and 91% of America don't like China. This is the worst record in 49 years since Nixon's visit to China in 1972. China understood the reason behind it, so we try to fix. If we truly implement what Xi Jinping said in our future diplomacy, in our future handling of our relationship with other countries, I think the first possibility of the post-COVID world order would be an improved one. China-US trust is not repaired, but improved. China-Indian relationship improved, so the border dispute is not gone. And China-Malaysia, China-Philippines, China-Indonesia, China-Vietnamese dispute over China's presence in South China Sea may be less intense. Therefore, the NATO, the new transatlantic charter may have less need to send NATO's warship to South China Sea. The other alternative post-COVID world order could be the following. And the US keeps demanding to inspect China's Institute of Virology Studies in Wuhan. And the US has mobilized other countries to demand this. And WHO would keep demanding. And China would say, no. You may inspect in a future outbreak of a pandemic, but not this one. This kind of approach would not serve China's interest in making itself trusted, respected, and loved. And then China may have a time-bound dream, the so-called Chinese dream, to reintegrate Taiwan with whatever means at our hand, and probably in 10 years. Therefore, China-US relationship would become more intense. And many countries would be worried, what if China would, after China integrate Taiwan, whether the international water passage of Taiwan, China, the Taiwan Strait would still be open. It would look like South China Sea. This would be maybe part of East China Sea. So China would police China would tell you to do this, no, not to do that. China may not treat it as international a place. So some other country would have a deepened suspicion. And they would allow America, especially the Biden administration, to respect American allies' concern and to lead them, to offer more resource and public goods for Quad, for US-based all bilateral military allies, and for NATO, and for transatlantic economic and investment relationship. I cannot exclude this kind of more deteriorating kind of world order. The world order would become more unstable and more down spiraling and more unpredictable, unlike what Mr. Putin and Mr. Biden have met in Geneva to stabilize their relationship.
Professor Dingli, you
1 minute.
Sure.
1 minute.
Sure.
So the second possibility of the world order may be more instability, more unpredictability. I think both exist. I aspire to work with all of you and with my American friends in America, in China, Indian friends in China and in India, to work together to avoid the bad possibility and to try to grab a good possibility. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Dingli. That's quite a fascinating talk. Professor Ozkan. I think you're muted, sir. You're still muted. Are you not able to unmute, or? Dr. Jaiswal, Dr. Ozkan is not able to unmute.
Yes, now it's working. Can you go ahead? Dr. Leoni says something.
Yeah, Dr. Ozkan is not able to unmute himself.
Ozkan, sorry. Yes, he has some.
Rajesh, do you want?
Yeah, please go ahead. Now he can. Yes. Ozkan, please unmute yourself.
Yes.
Yes.
Now,
Thank you very much. Thank you very
sorry
much. Sorry
about
for the confusion. You know, I think I fall out and I joined later and then it's confusing. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for organizing such an event, and it's really appreciable and I appreciate for the invitation. Let me start by saying several things. You know, when talk about the world order, you know, when you listen mostly American academics, you listen, you know, declining of liberal world order and all type of discussion. And when you speak to some Chinese academics, of course, they speak some part positive because they are the winning side to some extent, you know, that you see all the truth. But I want to look at the world order from a third world perspective. So what about other countries? You know, how they react, what's happening to them. So what I see basically, you know, just we enter the world which is very greedy. Everybody's looking for autonomy. Everybody's looking for sort of status seeking. You know, everybody's trying to relocate to relocate itself in global politics. Doesn't matter wherever they are based. That's the first thing. And everybody's trying to accumulation of power. But what I see, I mean, after COVID-19, we entered the world that I think state capacity will be much more important than regime type to some extent. And we have seen that in many places, especially still, you know, as we deal with COVID, I think that will still be on the table. So state capacity from now on we have to discuss. and what does state mean? What's the role of the state? And from east and west, health, education, basic services and everything. I think that's one discussion, especially in non-Western world, we will be focusing more, and that will be very important. And my second observation is that, as you know, every crisis now from now is become immediately global. From Syria to Venezuela, whichever crisis you look at, it's no longer a local crisis. It's becoming immediately global with several layers, local, regional, and international layers. So immediately, once any crisis becomes global, becomes a systemic issue, we cannot solve that issue. That's why we have lots of problems, and probably we will have more problems in many different parts. That will lead us to some sort of low intensity conflict. We see that in Syria in the last 10 years, in Venezuela, in many other countries. So that will be probably increasing a lot in coming years, because unfortunately, none of the actors can solve this issue alone, and there is no cooperation. Neither at international organizations, nor among different countries. So there is no cooperation because everybody is looking at different things and trying to accumulate more power in different things. And one other note, I think once the COVID is over, we will see one thing more, and especially clash between the state and these companies, big companies. Now, I'm not talking about only social media companies, but big companies. I think through manipulation, as we enter the world of populism in a way, more manipulation and everything, there will be more conflict between this. How we will regulate these companies, because lies are spreading more than 10 times than truth, and especially as we enter the post-truth war, this will be extremely important, because that will shape the discourse and directly influence the politics or the country. So that's another issue that's waiting for us. So far, it's not regulated. Some like Nigeria, for instance, they ban one social media companies, and banning is not a solution. But it should be regulated. How and in what ways it will be regulated? That's another issue. This issue relates to the interference elections that we have seen in discussion in the 2016 United States and other countries. So this issue will become much more important in terms of how things goes, and extremely critical, because in the populist area, this is very, very, very important. I think what I see, liberal order is transforming. That there is no doubt, if not dying, but no order at sight soon. There is no order at sight. We will not say an order soon, because everybody has different priorities. Each country has different priorities. But at the same time, we entered the world that I call everybody is becoming a semi-actor now. There is no full actor. I define semi-actor in a way that it creates a different interdependence. One actor cannot solve any problem either in its region or somewhere else without reliance of others, without cooperation from others, and I mean alone cannot solve, and also there is no cooperation. For example, in the Middle East, we see it very clearly. Turkey is semi-actor, Iran is semi-actor, Russia is semi-actor, even US semi-actor. They cannot solve any problem. Same in Venezuela case, same in many other countries. So we see a rise of semi-actors. They cannot solve the issues alone, and if there is no cooperation from the other side, they cannot solve it. This is not immune for powers. I think all of them, even the big powers, they are same. US, for example, look at Afghanistan case and another case. It's impossible to solve any issue alone. We enter the semi-actor area, which requires cooperation, more cooperation, and there is more venue for interdependence. But the fact that as I mentioned, there is different priorities, and it's very difficult for them to cooperate on many levels, and that's really complicating this cooperation. As I mentioned, I don't see any new order. I see more regional, local conflicts coming, which is mostly in proxy war ways. And mostly states saying, also we should mention that, discursive powers are rising, and action-based powers are declining, because you will hear lots of discourse from the powers that start actually with Obama in the United States, and that's now become extremely global, more talk and less action. So this is this is becoming new reality with the new global politics, and from everywhere, from local, regional to global. Probably more meeting, more talk, but less action. So that's something we should understand, and we should not be that optimist. You know, I'm always optimist, but I mean, we should see the reality as well. And I don't think it will change any soon in these dimensions, unless you know, different sides say that it's enough. So now there is no order, because I don't think I don't think which countries, I don't think countries know what they want. For example, look at the BRICS, what they want. We don't know what they want. I mean, if you ask each of them, they will say different things. And even, I mean, big powers like the US, China, I mean, they want something, but it's not really that concrete, or they're not saying. I'm not sure they know very well. So we enter the uncertainty, as Professor Shen mentioned, but this uncertainty is not immune from conflicts, especially regional-based and proxy-oriented issues. So that is the issue. We enter a semi-actor state that will continue for a while. And as I mentioned, you know, this will continue another 15, 20 years with the populist trend in politics and more discussion. And perhaps then, I mean, we will see something. Also, I want to mention something, you know, in many countries, sociology has transformed, but we should rebuild the sociology, not the state and politics, because sociology finally results in politics. In many countries, sociology has been disrupted, has transformed. In non-Western world, through economic development and other, or globalization, whatever, sociology has transformed a lot in a deep level. But that sociology is not stable yet. Is not relaxed yet. It's very moving very fast. And I mean, they think one day they can lose everything, next day they can do it. It's going between extreme pessimism and extreme optimism. So this sociology, until this sociology is stabilized, not inside the countries, but also at global level, I don't think we will see a stable order. So we should also focus, I suggest, is sociological transformation, migration, and different parts, and conflicts are creating more sociological transformation and movement. That's something we will see. So in sum, just as I say, I mean, the old one is dying. There is no new one yet. And this is a bumpy road. We will continue for a while. And COVID just underlined and showed this weakness in some parts, and it's still to come, especially when we enter the economic recovery part after COVID-19. So we will see that whether we will some economic cooperation or coordination or competition, we will see how it goes. So that will be also showing the true side of the countries, and we will see that kind of. Then we will see the face of system that it will be coming. So that's what I want to say in short and brief. Thank you very much, Professor Rajesh.
Thank you, Dr. Ozkan. I mean, it's several fascinating points, saying the impact of domestic social changes on global effects and its global effects. So we will again, I mean, I think a lot of different perspectives in terms of what affects the global order. Dr. Zeno Leoni.
Hi everyone. Thanks for inviting me. And first of all, congratulations for organizing such a major event. I mean, really, my warmest congratulations. Right. So I want to be within the time, so I better start. I want to talk about the blowback of American grand strategy and how we got from the Cold War to a new type of Cold War. And the main takeaway with regard to the more recent years is that COVID has accelerated a new Cold War that had already started between the US and China, but also, very crucial, it has accelerated the discussion over the idea of whole of government, which is a very important aspect in this relationship between the US and China. Before I start, can I just remind that we are at the eve of Kissinger's secret trip to China, 50th anniversary on July 9. And this year is also the 10th anniversary of Obama's pivot to Asia and on China, Kissinger's famous publication. Last but not least is the anniversary very soon of the Chinese Communist Party 100th anniversary. So it's a very important time to talk about these issues. apart from the symbology, when Kissinger visited China, the tone of the conversation with Zhou and Lai was very, very different. What has changed? So I want to give you an answer by looking at this concept of blowback, which I borrowed from Chalmers Johnson, but I reworked in a different way. So since the end of World War II, American grand strategy sought to encourage and support other countries' development and active participation in the world economy. And it also encouraged both former and potential rivals, Germany and Japan, for example. But this also applied to China, right? And blowback here means that the US is often responsible for the rise of its competitors. We've seen it from an economic point of view with Germany and Japan in the 80s, and we see it nowadays with China. Why the US was keen to make peace with China at the time, there was the Cold War logic, but later it became an opportunity for untapping the economic opportunities of the Chinese market and to make sure that China was going to become the locomotive of that world economy from which the US really benefits. And the US, and somebody said that the US was too busy feasting at the Chinese table. That was on foreign affairs. It was too busy feasting at the Chinese table, and so too focused on economic benefits that it overlooked the strategic implications of that, openness towards China. And this oversight, in fact, was particularly strong after the Cold War, when there was this idea of the strategic pause of the end of history. There were no enemies anymore. Interstate competition wasn't relevant anymore. And so at the time, the US National Security Advisor Anthony Lake said, we need to move on from the doctrine of containment towards a strategy of enlargement, which translated with Bill Clinton bringing China into the World Trade Organization. That was really Bill Clinton's very important objective. I think this strategic oversight lasted until Obama's pivot to Asia, so in late 2011. Then things started to change, and that's where the kind of new Cold War has started to take shape. At the same time, the international order was changing. At the same time of the pivot to Asia, the post-2008 or post-American world order idea, and there was a return to discourses of great power competitions. You can see this in many documents, strategic documents in the West. But there was also another shift, a shift towards whole of government, whole of society, which were concepts that you couldn't even mention at the end of the Cold War because there was the neoliberal hangover. So, there needed to be a small state, not a big state. Again, this has become popular both in the US and in the UK. Why it has become so popular? I think that the West has realized that China has an advantage with its state capitalism. And also, as Branko Milanovic on Foreign Affairs argued, China demonstrated that you don't need democracy to have capitalism. But above all, I think that strategic synergy that the Chinese state has with its strategic industries, it's really China's recipes for success. And I suspect now the West is trying to imitate that with this idea of whole of government. COVID-19 is very related to this idea because to this trend, because it aggravated the problem of over-reliance on China in the West. It made that problem evident, although the over-reliance on China is uneven. It depends on where you look at. But COVID made that problem of over-reliance more evident. And there's some people in the US, talk about loss of industrial commons. And this is not just about China. This is the whole history of globalization and the West, really. There's been a drainage of productive capability, of know-how as well. But that was the West's fault in a way. And, we've seen the health markets failing with COVID. We've seen that, we relied on the market for many years, and then we didn't have we were not ready with masks and with other kind of technology that we needed to face COVID. Even The Economist, very liberal magazine, said that, you know, after COVID and what we've seen with China, we need to perhaps rethink well-established political and economic theories, which I suspect these are classical economic theories. And so COVID accelerated this new Cold War. And in a piece, and this was, I'm talking about stuff that I published in my book on American Grand Strategy and China. But in a recent draft with a colleague from King's College, Dr. Garen Hughes, we're trying to deconstruct what new Cold War means. We don't think that this is a repetition of the old Cold War. We think that this is a new type of Cold War, which means that it's a Cold War, but for very different reasons compared to the original Cold War. And so, of course, there is this competition between the US and China, which is geographically global, industrially transversal, political, partly ideological, also military, although uneven, depending on the region. However, there is no, you know, there haven't been clashes between the US and China, so it's cold. And it remains cold to the extent that these two great powers have become interdependent with one another. So I suspect that especially in the post-COVID era, this new Cold War in this new Cold War, we will see a lot of weaponizing interdependence, kind of clashes, kind of policies. And I think I haven't kept track of the time, but I think I'll stop here. That's enough for me for now. Just to reassert the main, you know, the bottom line, COVID made the new Cold War worse, and also it led to a reassertion of state power, which we see in the whole of government approach, and this idea of integrating different levers of power to be more competitive in the geopolitical arena. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Leoni. Again, the fascinating presentation. So we have 4 presentations looking at different aspects of the emerging world order, the continuity from the past, everything from the role that the strategic community plays to social factors, to China's what is sometimes called the wolf warrior diplomacy, to looking at the difference between the old Cold War and the new Cold War. I think it's a fascinating point about whether this is the same as the old Cold War. I mean, what's the difference, and whether we need a different term to describe. You know, for a long time, the post-Cold War was simply called the post-Cold War. We didn't have a way to define what that was, other than with reference to the old Cold War. So, I mean, we still don't necessarily have a phrase or a concept to define the current world order. But I think clearly it has important distinctions with the old Cold War. So let me sort of look at some of the questions in the chat box. I think there was one that I just saw for Professor Chenoy. Professor Chenoy, do you think that in the post-pandemic world order, there would be an increase in the role of state in comparison to the role of in comparison to the role of the state in the previous liberal globalized order? I'm looking at the specific questions, and then there are some questions that are addressed to everybody. But if you could, Professor Chenoy, if you could sort of address that.
Yeah, I think this is a very good question, and clearly the state, which was withdrawing from several aspects, like especially from social expenditure, you know, and companies were taking, and finance capital was taking a greater role in the state, and corporations were able to manipulate states. I think COVID showed that the state has to intervene when it has to come to issues like health, and it cannot really withdraw from it. That is too big a cost, and governments can fall. As you saw, the fall of the Trump regime, I think, was very much that they could not cope with COVID, and though they were trying to do this perception management, and more is going to follow. So definitely the role of the state in some sectors will increase, but already states have given up quite a bit of economic power. Some of the smaller states to multilateral organizations like the World Bank, they let them dictate to them economic policies, and other states to corporations. It's an old thing with the US. What is good for General Motors is good for the US, etc. So the states will have to balance. But I think, as you can see, the way the states, the powerful states in the West have infused capital to revive their medium and small industries, to revive capital, to the free vaccination drive in India, etc. And the states will have to rethink their role in some sectors and come in. So I do agree that the role of the state will increase in the post-COVID order. And the second question, which is addressed
if I could just, Prof. Chenoy, if I could just sort of push you on that point, because Dr. Ozkan mentioned the role of the social media and so on. So, I mean, one could see it in two ways. One is that he mentioned the issue of fake news and the fact that information is no longer controlled by the state. But on the other hand, states also seeking to control the information also becomes potentially strong. So how does that, how does Dr. Ozkan's point about the rising importance of social media, how does that play into the question of the power of the state in the current sort of order?
Well, you see, ultimately, social media cannot replace the state. And in many countries, you can see China, they have controlled social media. They have not allowed Facebook and Twitter, and they've got their own versions of it. Nigeria has banned it. Of course, it comes in the way of freedom of information, and the fact is dissent is really being hollowed out in most of the earlier liberal countries, including India and a lot of South Asia, where first, social media was a very useful tool in the hand of governments as a way of communication, but maybe they find that they're not being able to control it in the same way. And so they're getting in new laws. Indonesia, Malaysia all have laws now which can intervene in curbing social media if they would allow it. And so does India now. And that law is being challenged in the United States. If you see today, the Washington Post has very clearly said that we don't like the way India is going to be handling its policy on social media. So there will be a debate on this, and I do agree with you, Rajesh, that social media, of course, it's very important to have a right to freedom of expression, but it should be with accountability, rights and accountability. But at the same time, I think that there should be autonomous bodies which regulate this, so that it's not unnecessarily clamped down by states which are authoritarian when they choose what constitutes freedom of expression and what does not. So these are all kind of complex questions, but they have to be dealt with, really. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Chenoy. The next question from Ritesh Panthi. It's kind of a longish question, but I'll sort of summarize that. Essentially, the essence of the question appears to be to sort of look at the ideological aspect of the new Cold War, and since the essence, the distinction between the old Cold War and the new Cold War. So let me begin with Professor Dingli, Shen Dingli, and then there's also a point that Dr. Leoni also mentioned. Then I'll ask others also about whether that I think that's an important issue in terms of whether this is whether ideology plays any role in the emerging conflict, in what appears to be the emerging conflict. Professor Shen Dingli.
Well, in my personal humble view, the old Cold War is characterized by two things. One is both America and the Soviet Union believed their own version of Unitarianism. One God, no alternative God. And all people should be subject to the mighty of the God. And if you don't accept my God, I am empowered to use whatever at my disposal to let you to accept my God. Because of this respective, exclusive Unitarianism, they waged the Korean War and Vietnam War. This is the old Cold War, which could be easily developed into hot war. Then, per this definition, we don't have a new Cold War now, because China looks to uphold Karl Marxism, which said there's only one correct way of living, of management, of governance, which is the so-called scientific socialism. But actually, China said the world has been enriched by different civilizations. Civilization has its own character. We cannot claim my civilization is better than yours, or we look down upon your civilization. Civilization even cannot be compared because of the fact that we happen to have more than one civilization. The world is so colorful. This is a much moderated current Chinese vision of the world order. So China is happy to learn from Americans' experience of Marshall recovery plan to build a road and a track. And America used to do this during its New Deal time, 1930s. And China is doing this in China, and after completing it, China is promoting it outside of China, but China does not impose it to other countries. If Pakistan is unhappy with CEPA, China cannot impose CEPA to Pakistan. So China has to woo other countries. We share the idea. We could develop. We could share the outcome. Other countries say, okay. But later on, they say not okay. So this is not my God is only God, and you have accepted my God. If you don't accept, I would send my armed force to beat you. So we have no war. We have ideological difference. China may think my ideology may be more superior than yours, but China still need to be politically correct to say we are all equal. My heart maybe that we are not equal, but we have to say we are equal, and we don't send military to conquer others for you to accept my ideology. Conclusion, we don't have new Cold War. If a Cold War is defined by the two elements I initiated at the beginning, but we have Cold War mentality. China may think, well, Taiwan should live my way. Why you don't live my way? And Taiwan would think, you should live my way, but I'm weak. I cannot conquer you to make you to live my way. The idea you should live my way, so I would not conquer you to make you to live my way. I would say maybe a kind of Cold War mentality.
Thank you, Professor Dingli. Can I ask the same question to Dr. Ozkan? I mean, where does ideology, what do you think of the role that ideology plays in the emerging global order in terms of the conflicts that we are seeing?
I think, as you know, I think we are short of ideas now. When we talk about global order and everything, nobody's clear. For example, let's say someone who is living in Africa or who is living in the Middle East. What would Chinese world order will bring to them? What is new instead? What would be different from the Western order? Economically, perhaps now that's what's happening. But still, this question is not clear unless unless China answers these questions in a convincing way that its order, like once it becomes a superpower, will be better and perhaps in terms of well-being much better than the Western one. Then perhaps the countries will go. But now, I mean, countries, Many countries, they are looking, they are in between. They are in between. They are part of the Western system, but at the same time, they are slowly trying to understand what's happening in non-Western side, you know, China or different countries. So, and while they are trying to develop their own autonomy, their own perspective, their own understanding. As you see, you know, you see lots of discussions, although non-Western IR, different discussions. You see everybody trying to understand its own world and trying to make a contribution in that sense. Whether it is, of course, it will be supported by power to go beyond. But that's what they are trying to do. I think it's not. I think when we talk about the world order, we should not talk about ideology. We should talk about the practical. What is there for us, and how a country can benefit from that system. We talk about the systemic issues. You know, values. Of course, each country has values. Of course, you know, it's better to have the democracy and all the values, you know, that we talk internationally, accepted by everyone. But through Western experience, we have seen even these values has been misused in many aspects. So then the people are still a little bit going away from the ideology, but looking at for other perspective. And we see that in generations Z, we see that more clearly.
Thank you. If I could sort of take one of the other questions, but very similar, dealing with the same issue to Dr. Leoni. I mean, ideology, but not necessarily ideology as in communism versus capitalism or civilization issue or anything like that, but authoritarianism versus democracy. I mean, does that sort of form, this is a question from Dr. Rajagopalan, but does that form an ideological sort of rift around which, you know, there might be conflict? I mean, is that what might be an ideological basis of a new Cold War?
Thank you, Rajesh. There's been a publication recently, a book about authoritarian states versus democracies. I don't believe that, you know, I don't think that's the reason why states will fight or will compete. I don't think a democracy will, I don't think the US is in this new Cold War with China because, simply because of the democracy autocracy dichotomy. It's not about that. It's more about competition over, you know, it's more about survival and maintaining economic primacy and technological international primacy. I don't think there will be I actually think the contrary. I don't think the world will be in a dichotomy between democracy and authoritarianism. I think there is actually what I wanted to argue earlier on about when I was talking about whole of government. I think that there's going to be a convergence. So I think in the West, there's going to be democracy is going to narrow. Part of the reason is, you know, the success of different models, competing models, different kinds of state-led capitalism in dealing with the crisis, dealing with lack of consensus and so on. On the other hand, you know, authoritarian countries, if you take China, for example, it has been trying to mild some aspect of its state capitalism because it wants to, you know, continue to engage with the liberal international order. Obviously, it's a challenge for China because they want to open up, but not too much, not to the point that this undermines domestic stability. So I think we will see a convergence, funnily enough, between the West and Asia.
That would be, I mean, realists would argue that when you have a competition, both sides ultimately end up looking somewhat like each other. I mean, go back to the Thucydides Peloponnesian War. It starts out as continental versus maritime power, but then at the end of it, it's both of them look very similar. So yeah, I mean, there may be a little bit of a eventually that conflict maybe leads to both sides looking somewhat like each other. And with the example that you mentioned about the whole of state, whole of society approach that Western countries are now forced to adopt in order to compete with China, might be an example of that. I mean, I would suggest, even in the Cold War period, the fact that a lot of third world countries adopted the Soviet model, I mean, you know, was again, you know, the success of the Soviet model in the 50s.
Yeah. If I may, sorry. So I just want to say that. So over the last 30 years, China has borrowed a lot from the West. That's what I'm saying. But at the same time, the West is now borrowing from China. And so that's what they call uneven and combined development. So when different models mix up.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Leoni. Professor Shen Dingli, there is a question about what are the internal sort of, I mean, I think this is a question that I'll address to others also, but what are the sort of the key internal issues that China needs to sort of address in order to become, in order to compete better, in order to become a global leader and so on? What do you see as the key challenges that China faces? That's a question from Yuvraj Jawaharlal.
Well, I speak from my personal view. President Xi Jinping said early last year, after the outbreak of the COVID, he said, we have some shortcomings in our work in terms of dealing with COVID. For instance, he mentioned China should make domestic law of biosecurity, biological security. We don't have a law. We should have a law. If we have a law, relevant law, we may be better able to prevent and to defeat the disease. In the post-COVID time, I think first what China should not do. China should not be complacent. Should brag that our system is the best in the world. Should not repeat such a kind of rhetoric. Awesome China. Let others to say awesome China. China should not say we are awesome. China should be humble. Should say, despite my success in managing the challenge, we still have lots of big room to improve. For instance, how to shorten the early warning time. For instance, to this time, we seem to understand the earliest time when China detected the COVID was in December, or maybe later December 2019. Then it took almost 3 weeks for China to conclude this is a pandemic. This might be too long for China, which believed it is a quasi superpower, or it would be a future superpower, to spend 3 weeks or even longer to ascertain that this is a pandemic. China may not be humble to say, I'm so sorry not to have shortened the time, but China should make it competent to much shorten the time to ascertain. And many expect China to provide the transparency. What China has done in its early stage in 2020. And China tells the world, we are great, but you don't have a right to prove we are great. So we will not share the data openly with you. China may be great, but China has not proven it is great in a credible way. President Xi Jinping recently has stated, for China's external diplomacy or propaganda, 外宣, we should make China credible, so others would trust China. And without sharing data in an open, a more transparent way, China has a distance toward an ideal China. If this time China cannot take 100 points, we cannot allow China in the future to take 99 points or 89 points. I think these are the first thing my government should do in a post-COVID time to make China to have confidence in preventing or providing early warning and to announcing as early as possible, and to partner with WHO and the entire world community, our Indian American friends, that China has done a good job. China may think I have already done a good job, but I think many countries, America and many in India, they may not buy it. And we should improve our work. So in the future, others would think China is awesome.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Shen. If I could sort of modify that question a little bit, Professor Chenoy, in terms of the challenges that states face, you talked about issues that human security related issues that have come up in the COVID. I mean, obviously, India has suffered enormously, demonstrated India's own tremendous failings in state capacity, which is not news to social scientists. Obviously, they have been addressing, they have been sort of pointing this out for a long time, but not just India, much of the rest of the world, developing world, have faced some of these issues. Some have done better, some have done much worse. And so how do you sort of see this issue of state capacity and what internally needs to be fixed? Is there a common set of issues, you would say, or are there specific to societies that COVID sort of the pandemic has demonstrated or brought to the surface?
I think.
No, I was asking Professor Chenoy.
Okay, yeah, Professor Chenoy.
Yeah. Okay, so I think I'm committed. Of course, I'm committed to a state, but I'm also committed to a liberal order, in a sense, having lived in a state which has had problems, which was underdeveloped and has had to face huge amount of poverty and challenges, but nonetheless retained democracy, retained some elements of accountability, freedom of expression, some amount of rights, no matter, of course, there was its own underarms and its own problems, caste and class and poverty. But I think states, this movement with COVID towards a more authoritarian state and taking too many powers away from citizens, and this anxiety to not be critiqued and yet to maintain legitimacy, these are not going well together. Professor Shen Dingli also said very clearly that the Chinese would like a more credible state. Now, how do you get a more credible state? And this is where, despite everything, and you can see this, it's related to what Dr. Leoni said earlier. If you actually see what the transatlantic charters, the new one, which Biden presented at the G7 meeting in Ireland, it says precisely this, that the competition is, though they don't believe it, they say the competition is between the authoritarian and the liberal and democratic state order. Of course, here I agree with Dr. Leoni that the actual competition is not between authoritarian and the liberal state order. It's about who is competing and getting closer to the great hegemon, the United States, and reversing that kind of competition. But nonetheless, they maintain this facade of, an alliance of the democratic world, an alliance of the liberal countries. And they're urging India and others to, if you want to join this alliance, you should be part of this kind of world order also. So in this, there was this other question written by Raghu Bista in the chat to me, which said, what do you think is going to be about the smaller countries in this, where the world order is being reordered? Smaller countries, and he specifically mentions Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka. And here my argument is that a plural order actually helps smaller countries. Because in this bid for competition, both China and not just China and the US, but also India and other regional powers, the regional hegemons, whether it's Malaysia or India or Turkey, they would look for alliances with the smaller countries around. And in that, there is a possibility for smaller countries to benefit if they do not put all their cards just with one country, just like in the non-aligned period of the bipolar world, then if you see the difference between the non-aligned countries and those which were aligned, like let's say between Vietnam and India, India did much better because they were non-aligned with either part, even though they were associated with the Soviet Union. But they weren't actually militarily aligned with them. They didn't intervene in any military, take part in any military alliance. So they were able to come up to a particular level and not have war. And I think that is what a lot of the smaller countries should aim for. Just like, they have been so critical in the TPNW, the Treaty for, the peaceful, whatever. 50 of them have signed independently, meaning that they would not like nuclear weapons. So they can become a force if they align together. And they can also put pressure on regional and greater powers. So I think a plural world, a multipolar world will go in favor of the smaller countries like Nepal. And you can see that how Nepal can work between China and India and Pakistan to get benefits and draw benefits from all. Thank you.
Do all states have that option? Go ahead, Dr. Ozkan. I'll ask that question.
Thank you very much. I mean, I just want to mention a couple of points with regard to multipolarity. I agree with Professor Chenoy, but I think when we talk about multipolarity, what type of multipolarity we will have? Because when we look at the small powers, especially I look at Africa, and I see two things. First, they get squeezed between different polars. Just sometimes, if they have problems, for example, they have to choose between them. We have seen that in the case of Somalia, for example, when conflict intensified in the Gulf countries, they have to choose between Qatar and Emirates. It's extremely difficult because they are weak. That's the first thing. So I don't know if that's advantage for small power. And second, the fact that we enter the uncertain multipolarity, which everybody's trying to accumulate their power, the fact that they are not able to create any groupings. For example, today African Union is less effective than compared 10 years ago because of the external involvement in Africa. Each country individually, they prefer to negotiate with each country. They go to India. If you don't get something from India, they go to Turkey. If you don't get something from Turkey, they go to other country. So instead of negotiating with outside power as grouping or as together, which they might have more leverage. So now they are being inclined to negotiate alone, small in their capacity, and they might seem winning in the short term, but I'm not sure if they are winning in the mid-term and long term. So that is like this multipolarity. What type of multipolarity is very important. I'm not sure if it's favorable for the small power. Of course, in the Asian case, you guys know much better than myself. But I look at the different part of the world. That's my take on this issue.
Thank you, Dr. Ozkan. In fact, that was exactly the question that I was going to ask, because I was wondering when Dr. Chenoy was mentioning this, that I suspect that situation is different for different sets of countries depending on where they're situated. And so in some cases, obviously, Dr. Chenoy is absolutely right in terms of talking about the advantages that a sort of non-alignment has, and India benefited enormously from both sides. From we're getting economic assistance. I think India was the largest recipient of economic assistance from the United States, and of course the largest recipient, one of the largest recipients of military assistance and diplomatic help from the Soviet Union. But I'm not sure everybody has that choice. I think that is exactly what I was going to ask. Dr. Leoni, you want to take have a view on that?
Thank you. But I was just going to add that, yes, on the one hand, I mean, the world of small states, it's so diverse. It goes from Iceland to some Gulf states, to Nepal, and and others, and even defining what a small state is could be challenging, because easy to say geographically, but then more difficult to say economically. Are Gulf states small states, for example? First of all, yes, I mean, I think it's very difficult, on the other hand, to escape the kind of pre-established alliances for some states. But I think the lessons that we get from over the last 10 years, so 15 years in the post-2008 world order, a major lesson that we get, which I've also read it in some strategic documents, is that the international system is fluctuating. So we should be honest and, expect that long established geopolitical beliefs, traditions, they might change, they might fluctuate. So I guess it's really key for any small states nowadays to, I know this is the most used word this year, resilience, but national resilience is key right now at a time when you don't know whether over the next 5 to 10 years, you will still have the same allies. So that's really key, especially in terms of supply chains, in terms of strategic sectors from agriculture to health and strategic infrastructures. That's what the small states really need to focus on.
Yeah, I suspect that resilience studies is going to make a comeback because we saw a lot of that in the odds after 9/11. We saw a lot of enormous amount of activity in that particular area. But I suspect that after COVID, definitely on the academic side, resilience studies is going to make a comeback because you're right about how that sort of came about. A question for Professor Shen Dingli from Aditya Thapa. Essentially, the question is about the fact that US has identified China as an ideological rival, authoritarian, and does that pose a problem for China in terms of enhancing its own role and its own sort of path to power? Does identification by the United States and the West as an authoritarian state, does that sort of create a problem for China?
3 points. First, I want to correct the question. The US has not officially and openly viewed China as a threat. US president has made it very clear China presents the most serious challenge. So China is a competitor, is a challenger, but not China has behaved as a threat. US defined Russia as a threat, and China less threatening than Russia, so it is called a challenger. So this is my first point. Second, China considers that I am not a US a challenger to US, because the world affairs should be managed by all countries. No country should claim the superior boss of the entire world. So the US can go to Iraq without evidence, without UN authorization, just come and kill. This is not what we are supposed to live. China does not have a power to send the military to Iraq to stop the US. Russia threatened, but they never do. China is smart. We don't have the capacity. And probably we are selfish. We don't want to do. Why we fight Iraq, America for Iraqi? But we don't like this kind of world order. And the US created UN to say all countries are equal in the UN Assembly, are not equal in the UN Security Council. But for the P5, they are equal. They collectively decide the world peace. But after reverting diplomacy from Taipei to Beijing, actually, US virtually admitted that People's Republic of China represent all Chinese, including Chinese living on Taiwan Island. But the US still maintains a quasi-official relationship with Taiwan, despite its commitment to Beijing that after severing relationship official with Taipei, they should not maintain official relationship. They should withdraw military from Taiwan. They should sever a mutual defense agreement. But then they create a unilateral one-way defense commitment to Taiwan. U.S. Marine is now operating in Taiwan. And U.S. Secretary of Health, Mr. Azar, visited Taipei. He visited not in personal capacity, but with official capacity. All this represented that the U.S. does not observe a rule-based world order. U.S. made a rule, U.S. committed, but the U.S. easily violated the rule as long as violating the rule is serving the U.S. interest. So in China's view, it's the U.S. that has repeatedly, frequently, oftenly violated the world order. And the U.S. said that China's land reclamation in South China Sea to make some artificial rocks is a violation of international law. Okay, if we want to observe a rule-based world order, everyone, especially Uncle Sam, the only superpower, should serve a teacher for all other countries. Middle power, small country, zero power, to observe international law. How U.S. can go to Iraq to make Iraq to lose 300,000 people? They lose their life. How U.S. can send its military to Afghanistan, raping women there, and its follower, Australia, it's a defense force killing the young kids who are innocent, who are not a criminal. So China complained, why the only leader would lead us this way? Since you can do that, why we cannot build some small rocks? And we have not stopped your operation. We just tell you, if you want to send US Fifth Fleet, Sixth Fleet from Indian Ocean to Malacca, to South China Sea, to East China Sea, to Taiwan Sea, then someone is waiting for you long before you arrived at Taiwan Strait. So maybe this is China's strategic purpose. And after China reintegrated with Taiwan, we would sabotage, would tear down those artificial rocks. So when people in this conference room think China violates international law, why you don't say US violated international law first? And I hope China would eventually tear down these artificial rocks after reclaimed integration with Taiwan. So this is China's view. We have not imposed ideology to America. We just want to do something to deserve our sovereignty. So many countries may not accept China. Many people in this conference room does not accept this view. But many in China does not accept your way of thinking. And all this tell me that China, US these days look at each other fundamentally different. This is very dangerous. If we don't reconcile, not to avoid misunderstanding, and we may destine toward a suicidal trap.
Thank you, Professor Dingli. I mean, in defense of the questioner, the question Mr. Thapa, I think, asked that question, but he wasn't saying that about China. He was saying that is China, American characterizations of China. He wasn't sort of necessarily supporting that, but I just wanted to make that clear because I didn't want to sort of put words in his mouth, as it were. Dr. Leoni, you wanted to comment on this?
Yeah, very briefly. So both on the English comment and on the question. I'll start with the question. So I think what we saw at the G7 is that the West is not so united when it comes to China, because different newspapers have reported how the US wanted to make the G7 about China. But for example, other countries like the UK, they wanted to make it more about COVID. And there are divisions there between the EU and the UK on the one end and the US on the other hand. It's not a united front when it comes to China. We'll see how that goes. We can't predict that. But We have also heard Boris Johnson criticizing the phrase special relationship. So I think China is, creates a lot of tension, right, within the West in the debate. But on what Dingli was saying, I just wanted to say that, I mean, these are two facets of the same coins. On the one hand, we have the liberal international order, which is US friendly. So it was built in the image or in the interest of the US. And I totally agree with that. I think I said that in my presentation. On the other hand, China has this selective approach. So where it's convenient, China is playing by the rules. Yes, it's benefiting from it. On the other hand, China is following its own national interest. I don't think we can find, an answer that, I mean, I don't think there is one answer here. There are these two aspects, and it's difficult to reconcile them, especially because we still live in a world organized in states. And so we always have this tension of, okay, do we abide to international rule of law, or do we follow the national priority of a country? There's no answer to this question, unfortunately.
I would add, I can't agree with you more. Why we want to avoid Thucydides trap, the way China is acting in a way that is convenient, could also facilitate the arrival of less respect or distrust of China. And that is what President Xi Jinping recently have made his remarks, that China should improve its work, working with the world community to present China in a more respected and trusted way. So I hope our government would follow Xi Jinping's idea to present China in an improved way.
Thank you. I mean, I think the next panel would be looking at the liberal international order and its fate and where that is going. So I think this is a conversation that will of course continue. But obviously there is a certain amount of there's an issue with regard to the power of states also, in the sense that, I mean, the liberal international order became the global order, as it were, because of the fact that the United States was a global power that was backing that particular order. And I think we can look at a number of different facets of the liberal order, but also in terms of looking at other aspects of the order, in terms of whether it's a nuclear order or anything else, where American power did have an impact on how those orders came to be. So I think power does have a role to play, which is part of the issue, because clearly, India, for example, has been a beneficiary of that, because the nuclear order, the rules of the nuclear order, in a sense, were changed just for India's sake. I mean, when the US-India nuclear deal was concluded. So I mean, power does have a role to play, obviously, in terms of how these orders come to be and how they are modified and how they maybe eventually decline. But we'll sort of have more of a discussion on that, I think, in the next panel. Any concluding thoughts, Professor Ozkan?
I think that's it. Just it has been a good discussion. Thank you very much for all the participants and all the questions that they thrown us. It was fascinating.
Thank you. Dr. Leoni, any last thoughts that you would like to sort of add? We are run out of the questions, so. Or any other questions that
thank
you want to ask?
No, I would like to thank you. I mean, after the last exchange of opinion, I would say that I think there are some areas where, great powers, every country should, make an effort to cooperate more. I also think that there are other areas where it's just unavoidable that states will continue to look at their national interest, and perhaps rightly so. I'm thinking about infrastructures, for example. So yeah, But I mean, this is a big dilemma, finding a compromise between international regimes and international rule of law and the very respectable national interest of states. Thanks again.
Thank you. Professor Shen, would you like, are there any concluding comments that you would like to make?
First, I want to thank Dr. Pramod Jeswai niece for organizing this. And second, I want to say all countries, big and small, apply one standard. That is an international system, international law. Not to use national law, but international law. And the big country should help the world to create a mutually acceptable international law. Once made, all countries should observe. We may undercut some national interests by observing such initially mutually accepted law, but eventually we would gain credibility and respect. The world would be more stable and predictable. That serves all countries. They could suffer due to observance of such international system.
Thank you, Professor Shen. I mean, I would sort of again thank Nice and Dr. Pramod Jeswal for putting together a fascinating panel. I am while I agree with both Professor Shen and Dr. Zeno, Leoni and others who express a hope for greater cooperation and sort of, you know, that the idea that states should sort of find common ground in dealing with the problems that the entire system faces, especially in the post-COVID situation. I'm a little bit skeptical about that states will actually do that. I agree that they should, but what states should do and what states end up doing are two different things. And so I unfortunately do think that we are set for a period of turbulence, and I suspect that the COVID situation, the pandemic, has only made that worse because it increased the uncertainty, suspicion, and fear that states have, especially the great powers have towards each other. And so I think but I fully agree with all of the panelists that is where we should go. I'm a little bit skeptical that's where we will go. Dr. Pramod Jeswal, do you want to take over?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, let me also thank all the panelists before I end. I mean, I have to thank you all the panelists. Thank you.
Session, we would like to express a sincere gratitude and thanks to the chair for agreeing to chair and moderate the session today. A sincere thanks also goes to all the speakers for being a part of the event and delivering such comprehensive and convincing presentations. We would like to acknowledge our gratitude to our friends from the diplomatic community, experts, academia, media, and different organizations. Finally, also the webinar and those who are live. Thank you for your valuable time and attention. This session productive with your questions. Once again,